Hello again. Today we will be swapping out the wheel hub and bearing on a Range Rover Sport. Classically, you can tell if your wheel bearing is bad by noting play in the wheel from the sides as well as from the top and the bottom. While driving, you will note a grinding noise that correlates to wheel speed and turning, but really doesn't correlate with acceleration or braking. Eventually, the play may become severe enough that the wheel completely separates, and that's something we'd like to avoid. The new wheel hub was purchased for $119 from Atlantic British and is manufactured by Hudson. However, they also sell the OEM Timken one, and that one is around $300. The axle nut is usually included, but if not, make sure to purchase one for $5. The tools you are going to need include the new wheel hub and axle nut. The ones seen here are the old ones. You also need a 32mm or a 1 1/4 inch socket, a breaker bar that fits these sockets, a 21mm 12-point wrench for the brake caliper anchor plate bolts, a 15mm wrench for the wheel hub bolts, a T50 Torx bit for the brake rotor. You'll also likely need a mini sledgehammer to encourage some parts to break loose. And since you're hammering metal with metal, I'd recommend some safety glasses so you don't end up like this guy. Once you have these items, you're ready to get started. While the car is still on the ground, brake free all of the lug nuts. Once that's done, jack up the corner you're working on and make sure to support it with jack stands. I jacked up the entire front end, but this isn't necessary. Now you can fully remove all of the lug nuts. Once they're all off, you can just take the wheel off and roll it away for later use. Next up is going to be using your 21mm 12-point bolt to remove the anchor plate. These are pretty high torque, so you might need to hammer them a little bit. There are two. There's one on the bottom portion and then another one on the top. The top has a little bit less room to work with. Because of this, you're going to be doing these little micro movements, but it will come out eventually. Once you have the two bolts out, you should be able to move the entire brake caliper off of the rotor. Now the question is, where are you going to put it? You don't want to strain the brake hoses, so what I usually do is kind of rest it on the sway bar, kind of over by the lower control arm. And it sits almost perfectly, but it's a little bit loose and it wants to fall down. Luckily I have these rubber tie things that have a metal core. They're like industrial twist ties. And I'm using these to kind of hold the portion that is leaning up against the upper control arm. This way it won't fall down. Next, take your T50 Torx bit and undo the rotor bolt. Hopefully the person who put it on didn't torque it too high. Once it's off, you could just take the rotor off. There's really nothing holding it on anymore. Looking at my axle nut, it looks like it was never crimped. Usually it's crimped here to hold it on. And so, usually you have to uncrimp it, but I guess that's not the case this time. The axle nut is really high torque, and so this is my setup to remove these. I had to change up the lower control arms in the past, and so this is what I came up with after stripping and ruining a few breaker bars trying to get these off. I take a 1 1/4 inch socket. This is for an impact wrench. I feel the 1 1/4 inch actually fits better than the 32mm, which is what you're supposed to use. So, but you can use either one. So take a 1 1/4 inch or a 32mm socket. I put a little extender on there, like so, and then I rest it against a jack stand. And this makes it so that when you're applying torque, it's not trying to twist off. It's delivering the torque perpendicular. You can see when you try to turn it to the left, it turns the axle also. And while I'm sure the gearing is fine and it's not going to ruin any gearing on the inside, I decided to put a little shim here to keep it from spinning as much as possible. Then it's just a matter of applying enough torque to get it loose. Now you can take the nut completely off and make sure you didn't break something. time for the 4 bolts holding the wheel hub in place. They're all 15mm, and there's 2 on the top and there's 2 on the bottom. Mine were actually pretty hard to get out, so I ended up applying some rust penetrant spray first. Since I had some time to kill while the penetrant spray worked, I took off the dust shield. This is not necessary, but I thought it would give me a little bit more visual room. I also applied some penetration spray to the front part of the bolts that are exposed. I put on some glasses because I was about to start hammering some metal with metal. These bolts are pretty tough to get off, so I ended up using the 15mm wrench and hammering one side of it to loosen them up. Eventually it did work, and I was able to do this for all 4 bolts. I decided now would be a decent time to loosen up the half shaft, so I reapplied the axle nut a little bit and put back on the socket and hammered it a little bit. And as you can see, the axle is moving in and out and loosening from the hub. Because of the boot, there's actually not a lot of room to remove the bolts all the way, but that's okay. You don't need to remove them all the way, you just need to back them out of the hub itself. So once they become loose, you can leave them alone. Oh. Pulling the hub off was actually a lot easier than it was supposed to be. Usually you need a hammer and hammer it from multiple angles so that it eventually comes loose, but mine just came off. I decided to take a wire brush and brush the mating surface a little bit. Looked like there was some grime. I don't want anything to get in the way of the mating surface for the new hub. Take the new hub and put it on, trying to align the splines. You might need to turn it a little bit to make it line up. Once it's on, you can start hand tightening the 4 bolts in the back. Once they're all hand tightened, you can go ahead and tighten them all the way using your 15mm wrench. Since I took off my dust plate, now is a good time to put it on. I just need to attach all the Torx screws again. Now's a good time to hand tighten the axle nut, and then we can go about creating the apparatus again that we used to loosen it. I took a minute here to test to see if there's any play in the wheel hub, and it's a lot more solid than the old one. So here's the apparatus again, but this time facing the other direction and with a torque wrench attached. This nut should be tightened to 170 foot-pounds. Once that's complete, you can stake the new nut just by hammering it with some sort of chisel. Now you can reapply the brake rotor, and after that's done you can refasten it with the T50 Torx screw. This only needs about 26 foot-pounds of torque, so don't go crazy. Now you can take the brake caliper off of its shelf that you made and reattach it. Just make sure the brake pads are lined up, that way it'll fit over the brake rotor, and once it's relatively in position you can hand tighten the 21mm 12-point bolts. These are tightened to about 203 foot-pounds, so it takes quite a bit of force. Once everything's in place, give it a little shake left and right, up and down, to make sure everything's where it's supposed to be. And now you can reattach the wheel, and once that's in place you just reattach the lug nuts and you're good to go. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. I make Range Rover Sport and LR3 repair videos as issues pop up, so don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any simple fixes that could save you thousands of dollars over taking it to the dealer. Thank you and have a good one.